right. Ladies and gentlemen, I would remind you that tonight we will be allowing citizens to be heard on this. And if you haven't signed up and you want to speak tonight, please sign up. Also, we'll be streaming live on Ustream and also YouTube. So we do have individuals that stay at home and do watch us. So we'll know how many that is in just a minute. As soon as those last few sign up there, we'll get rolling. Kim, when the last one gets signed up there, will you bring me the sign-up sheets, please? Thank you. For those of you who want to watch this live or have to leave, you go to the City of Castle Hills website, click on City Hall. It'll take you to Ustream or to YouTube, and you'll be able to watch live. Okay. Is there anybody else here that would like to speak and has not signed up tonight? Thank you. Notice of a public meeting and agenda, City of Castle Hills, Wednesday, March 9, 2016. This is a special meeting at 5:30, Town Hall, 209 Lemonwood Drive, Castle Hills, Texas, 78213. I will call this meeting to order and determine whether a quorum is present. A quorum is present. Before we get started, I wanted to kind of explain some ground rules here and exactly how we'll move forward in a organized manner. What we've done is we've invited VIA to come and give a presentation this evening, and they will give their presentation, and then council will be asking some questions at each council member. Everyone who has put together, everyone who's signed up will also be able to come up to the podium, and we're going to allow 3 minutes per person. And if you have any additional questions that you haven't heard been asked or wasn't clear, if you'll state that question, of course we'll tape it, we have it, but the city secretary and the city manager will make sure that that question is addressed, and we will put it in writing. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to post all of those questions on our website to make sure that everybody gets the benefit of the answers. How that will happen is we'll turn that over to VIA and give them 2 weeks to get back to us, and I believe the date is April 1st. Is that correct, Diane? April 1st, it will appear on our website on any questions. Of course, if you have any questions after this meeting that was forgotten or whatever, if you email them or address them to the city manager, then they will be addressed. If you don't have a computer or you're not online, we will also have the questions stated in writing, and copies can be picked up here at City Hall. So, with that said, the second order of business is discuss VIA services in the City of Castle Hills. VIA will have their presentation, and Leroy, Can you, okay, Shauna, all right?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Shauna Russell, Senior Vice President and Chief of Staff. Proud to join you here this evening as a resident of Castle Hills also. We are here to discuss this evening the services VIA provides and potentially how those would be impacted if the citizens of Castle Hills were to opt out of the VIA service area. At this time, we thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to attend the meeting and provide an overview for you this evening. I'm joined here this evening by our CEO, Jeff Arndt. We're also pleased to have our 3 board members of VIA with us this evening, 2 suburban city representatives, Mayor David Morin, Stephen Allison, the vice chair of our board, and Mark Harrison. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Leroy Alloway. He is our Director of Local Government and Community Relations, and he will walk you through the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you this evening to discuss VIA services that are being provided to the City of Castle Hills. Just as a way of reminder, the VIA Metropolitan Service Area does cover 13 member cities, approximately 1,213 square miles. We actually are the 2nd largest metropolitan transit agency based on coverage in the state of Texas, second only to Houston Metro with approximately 1,280 square miles of coverage. Within our service territory, we include 8 park and rides, 6 transit centers, including Central Plaza, which opened in late 2015. We have 450 buses on the street at any given time, serving 92 routes with 7,200 bus stops throughout the system area, providing 44 million passenger trips each year. And we do all of this on a half-cent sales tax, the lowest of the 4 major MTAs in the state of Texas. Houston, Dallas, and Cap Metro all operate on a full penny. What services we provide within the City of Castle Hills include our fixed route service, the VIA Trans paratransit service, and then of course we have a van pool service that is available for any resident in our service area to make use of. And actually, our service coordinator for the van pools is also a resident of Castle Hills. So just some quick figures for you to help orientate what exactly VIA does provide within your community. In 2015, we provided over 500,000 trips. You can see the number of hours that we've served, the miles that we've driven, and the number of routes that are within the City of Castle Hills and adjacent to the City of Castle Hills that help make up the over 500,000 trips we were fortunate and pleased to provide for you in 2015. Taking a look a little bit more in depth at the service, we do bring service to this community. Through the routes that we've got listed and that do serve Castle Hills, you have some of the highest performing and most frequent service that we have within our service area. There is one line within our service area that provides 10-minute frequency. That is our Primo service, Route 100. Outside of that, 15 to 20-minute service is our next highest level of service we can provide. And we're pleased that you've got Blanco, Wurzbach, the Loopers that are hitting that level of service throughout the day in peak hour. We do have 79 stops in and adjacent to Castle Hills. This does include 8 next-generation shelters that were installed as part of the rerouting of Route 534, and I'm going to touch on that here in just a moment. I know VIA Trans usage has been a question that we have heard in discussions. As of fiscal year 2015, we did have 21 residents of Castle Hills who were signed up for the VIA Trans service. Now, for comparison, when the Wedgwood facility was open, and as of December 31st, 2014, we did have approximately 42 VIA Trans customers that were using Wedgwood. Of the 21 registered VIA Trans users within Castle Hills, approximately 20% are primarily wheelchair users. But we do want to note that of the 2,100 trips that we're showing, 57% of those trips originated or ended outside of a Castle Hills address. A non-Castle Hills resident was making use of the VIA Trans service to come into your community. Or to put it another way, every dot that you see on the screen represents an end destination point for a non-Castle Hills resident making use of Via Trans to come into your community. We have been proud of our partnership with Castle Hills, and we look forward to continuing this partnership, including the rerouting of Route 534. We have seen approximately a 200% increase in ridership since we rerouted this line to go down Northwest Military. We've installed, as I mentioned, 8 next-generation shelters as part of this rerouting, and included in the roof of each of those shelters is the city seal of the City of Castle Hills. In addition, we did discuss this in December, we do have approximately $380,000 that the VIA Board of Trustees has allocated from Federal Transit Administration funds provided by our local metropolitan planning organization for passenger amenity improvements within Castle Hills. This funding can be used to build bus pads, sidewalks, improve stops, add lighting. Unfortunately, it is not available to be used for complete block-to-block street resurfacing. But there are additional improvements that we can make with this funding to help improve the rider experience for residents of Castle Hills. And again, as I mentioned, Route 534 was rerouted off of Lock Hill Soma onto Northwest Military, and we have seen tremendous increased ridership. This route continues to actually perform better than our overall system. I did mention the new shelters that we've installed. They are modular. We refer to them as our next generation shelter, our next gen. You can see an example of just one of the 8 that we have within the community today. Finally, we have been asked what would be the impact of withdrawal from the VIA service area. First and foremost, if voters elect to withdraw from the VIA service in May 2016, stops within Castle Hills will close. They will be removed. VIA buses and VIA Trans vehicles will no longer stop within the city of Castle Hills. And we have evaluated stops adjacent to Castle Hills, looking at the market that we would be serving and overall system efficiency. I wanted to walk through what this would look like. I know this was a question, I believe, from the 2014 town halls. What would happen if VIA was voted out? Every dot that you see in red on the screen on the map is a stop that we believe would have to close. Now, you will note on Jackson Keller, there are still some stops that are open. Those are primarily on the City of San Antonio portion of Jackson Keller, providing benefits for Lee High School and for apartment complexes that are in that area. When we look at Lock Hill Soma, for example, between West and Dreamland, we would have a number of stops that would be closing. There still would be at least one stop open just west of Lock Hill Soma to serve an apartment complex that's there within the City of San Antonio, and routes would be rerouted, and let's spend a few minutes talking about those. Route 2 will be diverted to directly serve the North Star Transit Center. Route 534 would be diverted back to Lock Hill Soma, but as I mentioned on the prior slide, would run closed-door service from West Avenue until it reaches Blanco. That would become a transfer point to connect the 534 with Route 2. It is important to note routes 97, 550, 551, 534, 602, and 651 that may continue to traverse through Castle Hills will run closed doors. They will not stop to pick up passengers or let passengers off. The same would apply to VIA Trans service. It would not be permitted to stop and take passengers or let passengers off within the incorporated city limits of Castle Hills. In addition, there is a net financial obligation that, based on state law, we would be seeking from the city of Castle Hills. In 2014, this number was approximately $400,000 based on the obligations that were outstanding at that time for the VIA system. Based on our system as it stands today, given that we have issued additional revenue bonds to help offset and cover the cost of a fleet replacement that we're in the process of starting, as well as in response to GASB standards that now require us to show our net pension liability on our balance sheet. It is estimated by our CFO that the net financial obligation for Castle Hills to repay the VIA system would be in excess of $810,000. The final specific number would be determined upon the effective date of withdrawal, and all sales tax revenue would continue to be collected by the state comptroller and paid to VIA Metropolitan Transit until that net financial obligation is met. At the current rate of approximately $491,000 a year, we're looking at an almost 2-year window where sales tax would continue to be collected and paid to VIA, at which time, though, we would continue to run closed-door service through Castle Hills. Finally, I want to end our presentation not on a note of doom and gloom, but on a realistic conversation. We bring a benefit to the city of Castle Hills, and we are proud to continue to do so. As you can see, we collect approximately $491,000 in sales tax revenue from the citizens and businesses within Castle Hills. We attribute approximately $148,000 in change to the passenger fares that we collect, and approximately $1,900 in VIA Trans fares. So Castle Hills contributes to the system approximately $642,000, and this is as of the end of fiscal year 2015. But we spend $1.62 million providing line and VIA Trans service to the residents of Castle Hills. In effect, our system is subsidizing almost $1 million worth of benefit above and beyond what we collect in sales tax. Again, I know I've covered this fairly quickly, but we do want to get to your questions. So thank you for your time. I'm glad to help answer any questions you may have. And we've also got additional staff resources here as well. So if I don't have the answer, I'm definitely certain that one of my colleagues can help me with that. Thank you.
Leroy. Appreciate it. Okay. As in tradition, we'll start with place one. Leslie, do you want to start, or any questions you might have for the gentleman with VIA or any of the staff? Or do you want to start with Douglas?
Could you please tell me how you identify the people, the 500,000 people that you claim ride the bus? What is their connection to Castle Hills, and what is the impact on Castle Hills?
Well, first, Councilwoman, thank you for the question. I do want to restate that I'm not making a claim about the 500,000 passenger trips that we've provided. So what we are looking at are boardings and alightings that are connected to one of the 79 stops in and around Castle Hills. Now, it is important to note that the 500,000, 557,000 to be exact, represent passenger trips. Someone hopped on the bus, someone hopped off the bus. I'm not representing that that's 500,000 people, but it is 500,000 trips that have been recorded and attributed to the stops in and adjacent to Castle Hills.
But you have a way of determining that because the bus has a way of measuring when people are getting on and off and where they're getting on and off. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. We do have stop-level data, and that is representative of an entire year of service for our service area. If we look on a daily basis, I would say it's approximately 800 that board on a daily basis within Castle Hills and approximately 900 that disembark within Castle Hills city limits.
Right. And again, you mentioned adjacent, so I don't know what that means. But I guess the question that a lot of people have been asking is, we don't know that those people have anything to do with Castle Hills, or that they're even coming to Castle Hills or leaving from Castle Hills.
Well, Councilwoman, allow me to address the adjacent stops. If I look within the number of physical stops located directly and solely in your city limits, it's approximately 36 stops. But if I look at the stops that serve this market, and again, it's what's reflected on the screen here. So Jackson Keller, Blanco, Lock Hill, Selma, coming down Northwest Military. This entire service represents the 79 stops.
Right.
Now, as far as specific if they're serving businesses, if they're engaged in commerce in Castle Hills. I would point you to, let's take a trip from a moment from our regular line service of the 557,000 and actually look at the Via Trans trips that are coming from outside of Castle Hills. So we know,
You're talking about via trans?
yes, ma'am, I'm actually looking at slide 8 in your
Okay,
presentation packet.
that's not the bus.
No, ma'am, it's not the bus, but I wanted to make the point for you.
Well,
You had asked,
That's fine, but I'm not asking about that right now. I'm asking if you could please answer specifically how you determine that the 500,000 people who ride the bus, that's separate and apart from Via Trans, have anything to do with Castle Hills or have any impact on Castle Hills? How do you determine that?
and again, ma'am, I recognize that question. I am trying to provide an answer for you on that point. I would like to use this as an example of the level of detail that we can provide. And I do also want to go back and point out, it's 500,000 trips that have happened, not necessarily 500,000 passengers that have been in the community.
I got that, thank you.
So when I'm looking at Via Trans as an example, because we have starting destination and ending destination points per trip, and that level of detail is not available necessarily on our traditional bus service, because we are not tracking riders at that level of specificity, it's easier for me to point to Via Trans to say, these are the endpoints where non-residents in Castle Hills are coming in to use services, visit family, or visit businesses within Castle Hills.
But how do you know that?
For Via Trans, we know that because they create a travel itinerary that says, here's
Oh,
my
I see.
starting
You're
point
back-
and my end point.
You're back to Via Trans, but we can get to Via Trans later. That's a separate issue. I'm not asking about Via Trans.
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
asking about the buses.
Yes, ma'am, and as I had, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but as I had mentioned, on the bus, I don't have an
Okay.
end destination that I could point to with specificity to answer your question. I can tell you the stop that someone exited based on numbers. But if you're asking me to give you a specific business that someone may have visited, I do not have that line level of detail. We do not track at that level. I can tell you the stops that are adjacent, and again, it represents 557,000 passenger trips in 2015 throughout the 79 stops in and adjacent to Castle Hills.
Okay, so now that since you've mentioned Via Trans and people who are coming from outside of Castle Hills
Yes, ma'am.
into Castle Hills, that's information that you can provide to the city manager, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so then we know, because basically what you've said before is that you have 21 people, most of whom were in wheelchairs, who live here.
Actually, ma'am, I said 21 residents, 20% of whom primarily are wheelchair
Oh,
users.
okay, only 20%. Okay, and all of that can be provided to the city
Yes, ma'am.
manager. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Leslie, we will be returning back through in case you have some more questions.
Thank you.
We will. You're welcome. Councilman Daggett, did you have any questions for the gentleman or his
Good
staff?
presentation. So far, the questions I had were answered, so not this time.
Thank you. Mr. Squire, did you have any questions for the gentleman or his?
Just a couple.
Okay.
Okay, so, first of all, thank you for attending and for the information that you conveyed. I appreciate it. I like fact-based stuff as much as you can possibly get it, obviously, too. I think that's what we're here for tonight. A couple things I want you to clarify. You mentioned that these routes, and I want to make sure to clarify that, you said they were the highest performing and most frequent.
No, sir,
I don't understand the context, I guess, what you meant by that.
Sure, and thank you for allowing me to clarify that, Councilman. When we look at the overall operation of the VIA system and we look at the frequency upon which our routes operate, we have one route in our entire system that operates on a 10-minute frequency. That's our Primo route, running from Fredericksburg into downtown San Antonio. The next phase, the next level of service is what we look at for 15 to 20-minute service during the peak period. You have Route 2, the Blanco Frequent, that runs at 15-minute frequency. You have Route 534, the Wurzbach Frequent, that runs at that 15-minute frequency. And then you have the loopers, 550 and 551, that run along loops 410 at that 20-minute frequency. So allow me to, again, to clarify, you're receiving some very frequent service, and outside of Primo, it is some of the most frequent service that we can provide today, that 15 to 20-minute frequency during the peak period for a bus to arrive.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any chance of Primo coming to our city in the future, if you may subjectively answer that?
Well, we are in the midst of Vision 2040, which is our 25-year long-range update. I would hate to presuppose what that plan may ultimately show, but I will point out there's a demand for primo service throughout our service area, and the funding, of course, will remain a challenge. Operating off of a half-cent sales tax, we collect about $166 million a year to cover 1,213 square miles. Houston Metro, for example, operates off a full penny, receives about $560 million to cover their similar size service area. So if we can find some additional funds, I believe anything's possible.
Okay. You mentioned some of the Via Trans trips into our city. If Via is voted to or discontinue the MTA for the city of Castle Hills, I just want to make sure that it's very clear. I think I know this, but I wanted to ask just to make sure for my own curiosity. Will Via Trans services stop into the city? If I live in, say, San Antonio, as an example, and I need to take Via Trans and get to an office or somewhere here in Castle Hills, would that be available to me?
No, sir. The service would stop. We would not be able to have a passenger disembark from Via Trans within Castle Hills, nor would we be able to pick up a passenger within Castle Hills and transport them to another destination.
Okay. You mentioned about the updated shelters along Northwest Military, and it's a good-looking shelter in my opinion. I noticed in the city and even around San Antonio, there's a lot of these poles on the ground that maybe have a tiny little seat on them, and when it's hot, it's hot. When it's rainy, it's rainy. Can you go over your plans? Are you looking at upgrading those? I mean, I understand we have this what we're going through right now, but down the road, is there potentially in the works to change out the shelters, at least within our city, to make them a decent shelter?
At this point in time, sir, we are in the midst of updating. We're adding approximately 1,000 next-generation shelters throughout the service area. So we've installed about a third to a half of those already. We still have additional locations that are being identified and being analyzed, but we are looking at how we can provide the maximum number of sheltered boardings for the entire system. When these 1,000 are in place, I believe the number is approximately 99% of our boardings will be covered, or let me rephrase, the majority of our boardings will have a sheltered stop at them. Again, as I mentioned, we have 7,000 plus stops throughout the service area. Not every stop will be upgraded, unfortunately, at this time, but we are targeting those high-traffic shelter locations to provide that level of comfort and amenity for our passengers. So it's a long way to answer to say we can absolutely look at additional shelter locations, but that will be something that we do have to look at based on the overall system.
Do we have in this city what you would consider any high-traffic stops?
We do have stops that are showing double-digit ridership on a daily basis, and actually based on, if I can turn your attentions to slide 6, that map does show where we have installed next-generation shelters. So we do have along Route 534. We also have at the very northern part of the map, in the northern part of Castle Hills, right around the West Dreamland, Lock Hill area, as a major transfer hub, or as a transfer hub for us, does have that next generation shelter as well. But it is something we're looking at on a continuous, ongoing basis.
Okay, thank you. You provided a packet for us. This information was something I think would be very beneficial on this. Questions may already happened, or this may already be already assigned, but can this be made available for anybody who wishes to get this information? We have a slide, so we have the packet, but I think the city, the individuals need to see this also.
We will absolutely be glad to provide a PDF of the materials that we've presented to the mayor and council, to the city manager for inclusion on your website.
Okay, sounds good. No more questions right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Squire. Mr. Paul, did you have any questions for the gentleman or his staff?
Yeah, just a couple. I have publicly stated that I'm for keeping VIA. So my questions will be to make sure that we have the most accurate information for our citizens to vote on, to make their decision to vote on. And like everybody in this room, I have one vote.
Yes, sir.
Now, that being said, I have this unusual thing about remembering things. And about a year and a half ago, when Mr. Gonzalez was here, he did one of these very nice presentations. And at that time, VIA's loss was about $600,000 by serving our city. Now we're at $979,000. It's amazing what a year and a half could do. The other figure that seems to stick with me is that at the time it was about $396,000 estimated that we would owe VIA if the city backed out.
Yes, sir.
Now you're at twice that.
Yes, sir.
So we go from ground zero, 1970 or whatever, to a year and a half ago, we're at 400,000, and now we're at 800,000. So, you know, I don't understand the progression of the numbers so fast when it gets close to a vote. Now, maybe I'm a cynic, and I apologize for that, but I told you up front, I'm for us keeping VIA, but I want accurate information.
Absolutely, sir. And allow me to respond to the net obligation piece first.
Sure.
So in 2014, when we provided those numbers, it was based upon the obligations that existed at that time. Since 2014, we have issued additional bonds backed by our fare box revenue and our sales tax revenue to be able to have an advanced capital program at VIA. This capital program will see the replacement of all buses within our fleet and switching those over the next 3 years to be a 100% compressed natural gas fleet. So that bond indebtedness is now captured in our net financial obligation number. It is a debt that's been incurred since subsequent to 2014. In addition,
Convenient.
with GASB standards, the general accepted accounting practices, we are now required by GASB 68 to include our net pension liability as an obligation of the authority. That net pension liability is approximately $126 million. So that, combined with the bond indebtedness that has, since 2014, been executed, results in having a total obligation just north of $337 million for the agency. The city of Castle Hills represents 1/4% of our total population. And so on the proportional basis, that $338 million total obligation, 1/4% gets us to the $810,000 number approximately. Now there's still a final number that has to be determined, but we're unable to determine what that exact dollar amount is at this time because we don't know what the effective date of withdrawal would be. Once we know the effective date of withdrawal, we're then able to run based on liabilities as of that date. This is our total obligation. This is the proportion assigned to Castle Hills that the system would need to be reimbursed to be made whole. And so it boils down to those two major points. We've had additional debt that's been issued since 2014, and then with our net pension liability now coming onto our books to be in compliance with GASB 68, we're at that $337 million total obligation.
That's interesting. So we'll be responsible because you decide to move it over because of the new GAP procedures. Interesting. And as far as the numbers of our people are concerned, then it's a number of population and not number of ridership, because we know that San Antonio would have proportionately a lot more ridership
Yes, sir.
than here in the city of Castle Hills.
Correct. It is based on the population within the city of Castle Hills as opposed to the population in the entire service area.
I have to assume this all is based on statutory.
Yes, sir. It's based on Chapter 451.611 in the Texas Transportation Code.
Right now, that's all I have, Douglas. Thank you very much, Evan.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Councilman Paul. Councilman Gregory.
Very good presentation. I'd like to follow up on what Councilman Paul talked about. If the obligation to the city, as you factored out to be over $800,000, why can't that be netted against the savings we would be saving you of $979,000 for 1 year worth of savings for not being in Castle Hills?
Councilman, at this point, we are looking and operating in accordance with the Texas Transportation Code. It establishes for us how we calculate the net financial obligation, but the exact question as to how that would be repaid would still need to be explored. I will say, though, that you would be asking the other 12 municipalities and non-incorporated Bear County to then cover the $979,000 instead of the $810,000. Let me put it in a different perspective. We would rather be able to continue bringing service to you and have that $979,000 benefit go into Castle Hills. But if you'd like a more specific answer, I'm afraid, sir, I'll need to get back with you because I will need to talk with our leadership and determine exactly what course they would like to take.
Yeah, I think we need further discussion on that. I think it's a good point. I'm not so sure there are many businesses that would start the fiscal year knowing there'd be $1 million in a hole on a certain aspect of their business and be glad to continue doing that. You mentioned one point. You were talking about it's just a minor point. You were talking about the San Antonio portion of Jackson Keller.
Yes, sir.
What portion is that?
When we're looking at that map, and allow me to go back to it, when I'm looking at slide 13, excuse me, and I'm seeing anything south of Jackson Keller is what I'm referring to as the San Antonio portion. It's the San Antonio
Wait a minute, we
portion of the market share of Jackson Keller.
But Jackson Keller is a San Antonio street.
Yes, sir. But north of Jackson Keller, the market primarily comes from residents of the city of Castle Hills. If the city of Castle Hills is not in the service area, then we do need to look at providing service to those residents who are supporting the MTA.
Another question on economics. No, it's not true. You have here a final number owed will be calculated upon the effective date of withdrawal from the system and forwarded to the state controller for collection. Who determines what the final number is owed, and how is it determined? And if there is a disagreement, what is the recourse?
The number is determined based on 451.611 of the Texas Transportation Code. It spells out the specific obligations that are to be looked at. These obligations include obligations of the authority authorized in the budget, outstanding contractual obligations for capital or other expenditures, payments due or becoming due in subsequent years on notes, bonds, or other securities or obligations for debt issued by the authority, the amount required by the authority to be reserved for all years to comply with financial covenants made with lenders, note or bondholders, or other creditors or contractors, and the amount necessary for the full and timely payment of the obligations of the authority to avoid default or impairment of those obligations. So in accordance with state law, we look at those 5 sections, those 5 categories, to determine the overall financial obligation that exists for the authority at that point in time. Based on that total obligation, we then take the proportion of the residents that Castle Hills contains as opposed to our entire service area and determine what that ultimate financial obligation will be. The reason I cannot give a more specific number than the approximately $810,000 or in excess of $810,000 is we don't know what the effective date would be at this time, nor can I, with 100% certainty, project out what the accounts payable liabilities would be, any of those additional variations. So if you'd like to think of this similar to a 10-day auto payoff, you have obligations that are existing, but the day you decide to refinance, to leave that note, this is the amount of money that's in question. That's similar to what's happening here. As far as more specifics about what would happen if we have a dispute, I will need to get back with you on that, sir, because I do need to discuss with our CFO and additional staff at that time.
Thank you. I have more questions, I think.
Please allow me a second to have a
The bond
drink.
obligations that VIA issued, are they issued through a public vote or just through an underwriter?
The bond obligations that we have are issued in accordance with the Texas Transportation Code that allow us to pledge fare box revenue as well as sales tax revenue to issue debt. We are the only metropolitan transit authority in the state of Texas that actually has a AAA rating on our bonds. So debt is a relatively new, and by relatively new, I mean within the last 10-year structure for VIA. It is allowing us to advance bus fleet replacement, provide more capital funding than a traditional pay-as-you-go system. But we are still approaching this from a very conservative standpoint, and all of our financials are available as well. We just had recently a clean audit for, I forget how many years in a row it's been now, but glad to provide a copy of that to you as well, sir.
So unlike the school districts, you can issue an unlimited amount of debt without the participants within the area that you serve deciding whether they want that debt.
No, sir, I would disagree respectfully with that. There is no such thing as unlimited amounts of debt that can be issued. We are a political subdivision of the state of Texas. We do have to be able to repay that debt, and it is based on the debt capacity as determined through our revenue stream, what debt is still outstanding, what reserve funds we have available. So I would disagree with that characterization. We are looking very strategically where we can use debt financing to accelerate benefits for our riders. Being able to replace a fleet of buses, to have 500 new buses coming in over the next 3 years using compressed natural gas represents upwards of $100 million worth of capacity and $100 million worth of debt to flip the buses into our fleet. This also, though, gives us a new bus fleet when you look at our existing structure that has different buses from diesel to diesel hybrid to some CNG, some electric. We'll have a continual fleet, we'll have new buses, and they'll be starting their life versus being at the 15 to 20-year service mark. So it is providing a benefit to the community. Again, I'm glad to provide a copy of our audited financial statements that can go into more depth and detail for you regarding our philosophies on debt issuance and how it's been utilized for the benefit of the system.
I'd appreciate it. Another issue that's come up in San Antonio is rail, and it's been voted down once, twice, something like that. If rail is ever accepted by the city of San Antonio, and I don't know whether Castle Hills would be voting on that. I think it's been primarily a San Antonio question. I'm just not sure. Does anybody know? I can't remember. This would be an enormous obligation you would be taking on, and I assume you would be issuing new debt for the coverage of that obligation for new rail service. Would this really balloon what Castle Hills would then owe you because there would be a significantly larger amount of money out there due to new rail service voted in by San Antonio?
Well, Councilman, unfortunately, I'm not able to engage in speculation at this point. As I mentioned to Councilman Squire, we have what we call Vision 2040, which is underway. This is our long-range plan looking over the next 25 years. I do not want to presuppose what will be in that plan, as we are still listening to the community and listening to the public as to help us prioritize corridors that we can look at for frequent bus service, for enhanced Primo service. But I can tell you that with the capacity that we have today with our sales tax, we are providing very efficient service covering 1,213 square miles. Now, what the future may hold is anyone's guess, but I would be doing a disservice to you, to VIA, and to the ladies and gentlemen in this room and listening online if I was to offer more speculation at this point. I can tell you it's something that we would have to address at a future time if and when that would come to pass.
Well, mine was a simple question. It just said, if San Antonio voted in rail, would Castle Hills be legally responsible, in part, for the increased debt that you'd have to issue for the new rail service?
And as I'm not an attorney, sir, I'm not able to offer an opinion on a legal matter for you.
Thank you. That's all right now.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. We will,
I have another question.
sure. Leslie?
Hi.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Gregory asked you a question, and I didn't hear you answer it. You went off into something else. The question was that he wanted to know if VIA, unlike school districts where voters have to vote on bonded debt, if VIA was different, and you didn't answer that.
Yes, sir. I believe I did answer by saying that we have the statutory authority to issue debt based upon our fare box revenue, as well as our sales tax.
I understand that, but you know, you did this to me before. yes or no, do the entities that are obligated have the right to vote as they have in the school district? Or is VIA somehow separate from that and nobody gets to vote except the VIA board? Does anybody else get to vote? In other words, can you just incur as much debt as you want for whatever reason and nobody gets to vote on it? That's my question.
Yes, ma'am. And as I said to Councilman Gregory, the assumption that there's an unlimited amount of debt that can be issued is a faulty assumption. There are limits to what bondholders are willing to hold. And Councilwoman, I am trying to give you an answer to your question. I recognize you want me to say, no, no one has a right to vote on VIA debt, and I'm not going to say that, because I am pointing out that in line with the statutory authority contained within the Texas Transportation Code, we issue debt in accordance with those requirements. I don't know if there's any additional...
Well, I think the answer is fairly simple. The question that he put to you was that you're not like a school district in the way that they get the voters to vote. And your answer is, that's correct, you're not.
Yes,
That's what
ma'am. We
you're
do not
saying.
charge...
Okay,
we do not
simple answer.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me just take 1 second.
Sure.
We are authorized to issue bond debt without an election in very limited circumstances. We do not have unlimited circumstances under which we can issue bond debt. And
Right.
so the circumstances under which we can issue bond debt, which are fare box revenue, for example, we have done so, and we probably issued the amount of debt that we could against those revenues now. I would say to you that any substantial additional debt we would take on would require us to go out for a vote. But we would like to be able to get back to you and tell
I'm
you
sorry, any
specifically what
substantial amount of debt would what? Would
likely require us to seek a vote, because there are only certain circumstances under which we can do that.
Have you
No,
ever?
we've only issued
ever,
debts twice.
Since the 70s, have you ever had anybody vote on debt?
No, we didn't issue any debt from 1970 until about 2012 or 13. We had issued no debt. So obviously, there was no opportunity to vote during that period of time. In 2013 and 14, we did issue some limited debt.
Limited.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Leslie. Mr. Daggett, did you have any other questions or comments for the gentleman? Mr. Squire, did you have any other questions or comments for the gentleman, please?
I'd like to reserve that till after the public speaks.
No problem. Mr. Paul, did you have any questions or comments for the gentleman?
I think it's time to listen to the public.
Thank you. Mr. Gregory, did you have any comments or
I have one
questions for the
one
gentleman?
question I failed to ask. There are 21 people in Castle Hills who use Viatran. How much does it cost VIA to provide service for those 21 people?
If you'll excuse me for 1 moment, sir, I need to grab one piece of paper I forgot.
Sure.
I will get you a specific number, Councilman, as to what the exact cost is. Now, in the presentation, we do have a total dollar amount that reflects the amount being paid by VIA. I can say, though, that we are looking, at least for a cost of an hour of our Viatran service, at approximately $60 an hour. So each trip can be different. Each trip can have multiple variables that go into it. The expense that we are showing, and I will say this, actually I stand corrected, sir, this $37,000 amount is attributable directly to residents of Castle Hills that have used the Viatran system. The 2,100 number that I showed earlier in my presentation is reflective of all Viatrans trips that have come into and out of Castle Hills during the last fiscal year. But the Viatrans expense that we're showing is $37,931 for fiscal year 2015.
I don't think you answered my question. My question was, how much was the expense of the 21 people in Castle Hills? How much did it cost VIA to provide service to those 21 people?
Yes, sir. And as I'm pointing out, when we look at the numbers that I'm showing on slide 16, these are the expense directly attributable to Castle Hills. $37,931 for fiscal year 2015. Earlier in the presentation, when I've talked about 2,100 trips and that we've had 57% coming from outside Castle Hills, that 57% are captured in their originating cities as far as an expense item. This $37,000 item is directly related back to residents within Castle Hills using this system, but we will verify that number for you and get back to you.
So from what I gather you're saying, it costs $1,806 per person per year of the 20-wood people who use Viatran in Castle Hills.
Yes, sir. You could average that way. However, as I pointed out, each trip will have its own variations. It may be 3 or 4 stops. It may be a short distance trip. So to make that average would be doing a disservice. I do not have the specifics as to how many trips each person has taken and their average length and all of the available data that could go into that per person calculation. But I can tell you the number reflected on the screen is directly from our finance department as attributable to expenses incurred within Castle Hills.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. Okay. Is there anyone else before we get started? All right.
Just one quick one.
Sure, Mr. Paul.
In the financing aspect of it, how much of your money to buy the buses, to do all this, are brought to you by federal grants and things like that? Or is this all revenue generated, period, internally?
Approximately 75% of VIA's operating budget comes from our sales tax. But I'm glad to get, again, Councilman, with you in more specifics as to what proportion of federalized funding we are using. We do seek federal funding wherever possible because we are able to leverage it
Well, of course,
to a great
but in
deal.
federal funding then should also reduce Castle Hill's obligation in the event that the citizens chose to withdraw from VIA. And I have no idea. I'm not saying that they would.
I would point out, sir, that with the Federal Transit Administration, for example, we have to, as long as we're using their funds, we have to maintain control of the asset as part of our system.
Well, we don't take control of the assets. You keep them. You're fine.
Yes, sir. But we do need, let me get back with you on an answer for that, sir. I'd like
Appreciate
to
it.
make sure I've got a
Okay.
specific number for you.
Thank you.
I do have one more follow-up question, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. Okay, hang on.
Yes, sir.
I've known VIA very well. I've known a lot of the men and women who've run that until about the last 12 years. So I'm very familiar with VIA. Has VIA had an additional burden by the federal government in the last 10 to 15 years on having you, specifically the bus service, increased unfunded liabilities that the government mandated for you to do, but they failed to provide the income for you to have? Isn't that what's happened to VIA the last 15 years? There's been a sharp rise in the federal government telling you what you had to do, but you had to fund it yourself?
And allow me to ask Mr. Arndt to answer that question.
I would say in general that there have been obligations of the federal government, for example, those associated with ADA paratransit, where the standard of service, et cetera, is set at a pretty good threshold, and for which we don't necessarily get federal funding. The other thing I would say, I'll just give you a quick response on the buses, that buses are eligible for federal funding as long as that federal funding is there. And the federal government removed most of the funding for discretionary bus buys in their last appropriation. In the new appropriation, we may have a greater opportunity. And I will certainly take into account your comment about if there were federal funds applied, how would that work into the calculation? But I'll just tell you that federal funds had been removed fairly substantially in recent years. So that's correct. Yes, sir. I do understand that. I would expect you to be.
Well,
Thank you.
I understood the burden that VIA has been dealing with the last few years. It's a very different company than it was 25 years ago and 20 years ago. VIA spends a great deal of money on lobbyists in various places in Austin, as they very should. Have you all tried to lobby to reinstate somehow some of this money that the federal government is now saying, we're not going to do it, you have to do it. Are you addressing that at all in Washington or in Austin? You have a lot of lobbyists, so I mean, I hope you are.
Yes, sir. We, as part of state associations, regional associations, and federal associations within the industry, and also within local governments and things of that nature, other transportation professionals within the industry, we do routinely have a program in Washington and Austin that tries to draw attention and, in addition to attention, increase funding and opportunities to leverage funding back at home for public transportation, multimodal opportunities, and continuing to have a quality of life in our region. So yes, absolutely. The FAST Act, the federal reauthorization that most recently occurred, that would be a perfect example. We were very involved in Washington and also as part of an 8-state region called the Southwest Transit Association to try to ensure, to Mr. Arndt's example about the bus discretionary funding and increasing, not only, Texas does very well in formula-based appropriations at the federal level, so always we try to advocate for the importance of formula-based funding to be important and primary, but then also additional discretionary opportunities provide us additional opportunities to try to grow that revenue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas.
One more question.
Mr. Daggett?
The system subsidy for Castle Hill is almost $1 million. Proportionate to San Antonio as a whole, what type of loss do y'all run servicing San Antonio? Or why is there such a loss for Castle Hills proportionately?
When we look at, I'll just give you an example. When we look at the line service expense, so going back to the approximately 7 lines that we have running through Castle Hills, that proportion is approximately $1.5 million a year to be able to run those buses and run that service. We do receive, though, $491,000 from sales tax, $148,000 from the line service fares that are in this area. So we're still having that challenge. Now, as an overall system, we do have a balanced budget. We do have a reserve fund. We do operate a very effective, efficient service. We're actually the most cost-efficient among our counterparts in the state. So looking at this as an individual community gives the appearance of the subsidy. When we look at the overall system, though, we're still providing 44 million trips per year, hitting a very large service area, and we're operating off of that half-cent sales tax where our counterparts have the full penny. So that all plays into this. Hopefully that answers your question, Councilman.
All right, is there anybody else before we go into the citizen portion of this? Thank you. This is the time that you, the citizen, views will be heard. If you don't have any questions that have been answered, of course, we're taping all this, so we'll be able to actually go back and get those questions. But if you could address those questions to the city secretary or the city manager upon your presentation, that would be good too. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in order of the way people signed up. There was actually 3 sheets, so I hope I got them in order. With that said, before we get started, I'd like to introduce somebody that I saw come in, and his name is Mr. Dwayne Robertson. You stand up, sir. He's the executive assistant to Judge Wolf in Bexar County. So, wanted to thank you for coming, Dwayne. Okay, the first one on the list. How this will work is when the person comes up, as I stated earlier, they will address their views or comments. We have a 3-minute limit. We'll be timing it over there, and we have approximately 14 people signed up, so I guess you'll figure how long that'll be. Also, any of the questions that they asked will be written down, addressed with Via in writing. Via will get back with us within 2 weeks, and it will be posted on our website based on the question that was asked. And they have agreed to that. So with that said, the first on the list is Bruce Smiley Califf.
I'm Bruce Smiley Califf, 247 Foxhall Lane. Mr. Mayor, City Council, VIA staff, thank you so much for having this hearing tonight, Mr. Mayor. I think it's been very, very informative, and I thank VIA for the excellent presentation and the accurate information. I do have a question. On the ballot is a two-phase ballot. One has a vote on whether to continue or discontinue Castle Hill's involvement in VIA. I am on the record, long-term on the record, as being a supportive player and think that Castle Hill should stay with VIA and public transportation. The second part of the ballot addresses an alternate use of the sales tax if the citizens decide to withdraw from the VIA operation. Here is my question. Is there a plan for having the state controller or his representatives give a presentation to accurately explain alternative uses for the allocated sales tax if Castle Hill citizens were to withdraw from VIA service? Not just by category, which has been represented on the ballot, but specifically the uses of that category as they would be allowed by state law. I don't expect an answer to come from the dais. However, that is a question I'd like to know if you have considered having done to sort of balance the citizens' decision. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Califf. We'll make sure that that question gets into the system, and your answer will be on our website on April the 1st. Next is Brother William Dooling.
Thank you, Mayor. Brother William Dooling, 201 Gladiola Lane. And I have two statements and then a question. And so I want to go on record as being that I am supportive of VIA, but I wanted to again thank Mr. Arndt for when he was here previously, and I know Ms. Winger has said nobody asked for the route to be changed, but I did. And they complied and rerouted the Lock Hill sub over to Northwest Military, and I'm glad to see that it's successful and ridership and all of that. So that's one statement. The other statement, though, has to do with part of the presentation tonight seemed to indicate a change of mentality with VIA in terms of referring to stops in Castle Hills and those adjacent. But then, like all shell games, it kind of switched. And then we're talking about, well, closing the ones here and there, and maybe we'll look at those. And we had this discussion, and Mr. Gregory is on record. I believe it's true, but nobody knows. It's my understanding that on Lock Hill, Selma, and Blanco, all that right-of-way on both sides of the streets belongs to San Antonio. There simply are no bus stops in Castle Hills on those two streets. I find it a shell game to say that residents of San Antonio that live on Blanco, take the Blanco Arms Apartments, that they can only get on or off the bus on one side of the street. I don't think you're going to do that, and I think it's disingenuous to suggest that you will. So I think you need to be more clear. I want you to win this election. But if you don't preside, and then the other part of the statement is, you give all this information to the council. I suppose this is a council meeting, but it's also billed as a town hall meeting. There's lots of people sitting out here who got nothing. You can't really see the red dots up there. And if you don't provide a handout that's clear and unambiguous, this stop will close. Pure and simple. How are people ever going to know? And I just think there's a lot of lack of transparency here on that issue. And then excuse me, that actually was my question, was to have more clear, unambiguous. all this stuff about the finances is somewhat esoteric, and I think probably beside the point. What people want to know is what stops will close, put them on a map where people can see them, and this is where the service, and if it's rerouted over into Lock Hill, Selma, you can only get on or off the bus on one side of the street. I dare you to put that in writing, because I don't think you will do it. If those are rerouted in Blanco, you'll have stops on both sides of the street to service the people in San Antonio. And maybe we could be free riders, I don't know. But I think you need to tell that up front and then let people vote here or there as they would. On a side note, in terms of Via Trans, I have experience with personal friends of mine and others who complain bitterly about the amount of time they have to wait for Via Trans to either pick them up or come pick them up to take them
Brother
home.
Delian, can we wrap it up? It's been 10
So I
minutes.
just
Thank you.
want you to know that there are other options available, such as like the TNC companies that don't have dispatch where there's immediate response to delivery of service and that sort of thing. I think you need to be more creative in providing Via Trans service. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Dilling. Okay. Next on the list is Amy McLean.
Mayor, City Council, and members of VIA, thank you very much for coming tonight. I had lots of questions after the last town hall meeting, and I thank VIA for coming with a lot of answers to most of my questions. Amy McLean, property address is 105 Villa Ann. Our street actually, we back up to Blanco, and it's always been my understanding that our dirt at the edge of Blanco is Castle Hills, and so City of San Antonio is maybe the street, but that little bus stop that's right at the corner of Castle Hills on my neighbor's property, I do believe is in the city of Castle Hills, but I digress. I am for VIA. I'm for keeping VIA because I think choices with transportation are very important, looking at our future and thinking about my children and the options that we may all choose to drive cars, but it would be nice to have options. So I am very much for VIA and thank everyone for continuing the dialogue.
Thank you, Amy. Next on the list is Jack Clark. Okay. You don't have to. I'm sure it'll be public anyway, so.
Well, I'm Jack Clark. I live at 100 Trillium Lane. Very delighted to live in Castle Hills. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I was not expecting it, but glad to be here. I live in Castle Hills. I work at Fort Sam Houston. I consider myself a person with feet in both communities. I don't believe we can separate ourselves from San Antonio. We rely on San Antonio. I rely on San Antonio, and I believe San Antonio benefits from having Castle Hills here. It's a very wonderful community. I value our, police and all our citizens here. I would support keeping VIA because I believe many people use that system to come to their jobs here. I use it to go downtown when I don't want to drive and park at the Riverwalk and have to fight through all the people. And I think it's a wonderful thing that we have options, as you said, ma'am. And I want to go on record as supporting VIA. I believe we're all in this together, and I want to see that continue. Thank you for this time to share that.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Michael Bland. Okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Okay, next on the list is Sylvia Gonzalez.
Everybody's taller than me. Sylvia Gonzalez, 103 Wickford Way. I thank you for all the good information, but I'm kind of in a maze about the locations that are actually Castle Hills, because I understand that West Avenue is from in front of the HEB there at Jackson Keller, to Lock Hill, Selma is San Antonio, is Castle Hills, but the surrounding streets are just all San Antonio or the state. Because I know that Military Drive and the access roads belong to the state. So our vote would be impacting what locations? I'm confused now. That's my question. And of course, somebody else had the same one also. And also that $800,000 plus, is that for new buses, you say? Is that correct? Or is that for the money you've spent within Castle Hills? That's another question that I have. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Sylvia.
you.
Appreciate your comments. Run the tape later. Okay. Okay. Van and Jane Garcia. No problem. Thank you for being here. I've signed the wrong list myself several times. Okay. Charles Hilton. Charles, Hilton. 13 Roletta, yes, sir. You wanted to sign in back there. Thank you for being here, sir. Terry Bidrow. 313 Townview. No problem. Thank you for being here. Thank you very much for being here. Yes, ma'am. We'll work on that. Bill Barker.
Mayor and Council, thanks for the opportunity to address this issue. I'm a resident of Castle Hills, have been since 1997. Moved here and bought my house on 121 Castle Hills Drive because I was within a quarter mile of Route 2 bus on Blanco Road, and used the bus regularly to get downtown, get to work. And I considered it an asset of Castle Hills to live in a nice community and have good bus service. And tonight I learned that that may go away, and my choices in transportation may be taken away. One of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, said something to the effect that if you don't, in order to have freedom, you have to have choices. And Thomas Jefferson said that if we don't have choices, we don't have freedom, in so many words. And so I'm a little disturbed that my choices are possibly going to be taken away. I would note on this idea of voting on any debt that via might occur strikes me as a little odd. I think it'd be strange to vote on whether VIA should buy new buses or not. Certainly that's a normal part of business for an organization like that. I don't remember voting on SAWS borrowing money to build more water lines or sewer lines, or CPS Energy and their expenses. I think it's just fine with me for public agencies, given the tight regulations that they have on borrowing money and the restrictions of the financial markets themselves, to stay within reasonable limits on borrowing money for ordinary expenses. I do have a question. I'm wondering how many businesses would be affected by this. I know on my street I see people walking to and from the bus stop on Cass Hills Drive, domestic workers, and we've probably all been over to the HEB. I wonder how many of their employees and customers get to and from the store by public transit. We see Pape Dawson has just built their new headquarters there on 410, right near that HEB, And I wonder how many of their employees get there by transit, and I wonder if locating there was part of their consideration. Certainly businesses do think about how their employees are going to get to and from work, and I have heard nobody address this particular issue at all, and I think it'd be a useful part of the discussion. Thank you very much for letting me speak to you.
Thank you, Mr. Barker. Terry Worth.
City Council, folks in the audience, via Terry Worth, 124 West Castle Lane. I'm here to share my support for VIA, for some of the comments Mr. Clark mentioned, and the young lady that was prior to your comments. The gentleman, his comments mentioned. I really think there is a real value for our community to be served by VIA as it relates to present, future choices that people might have of locations, businesses, how and what we are in a mindset of greater good for not only ourselves, and we all need to be responsible with the monies that we have, that we're blessed to have, that we earn, that we don't want to be frivolous with them and waste them. But there are support systems within a community that we as a community will want to have to make sure that we're all benefiting in those services. And the comment about SAWs and others, I think VIA in many ways fits into that framework. And I just hope at the end of the day that we have a sense of choices. That's a very good phrase. And how much time do I have left? 30 seconds? There was a time, I'll make the statement, that I had the opportunity to ride VIA in the middle of the real estate depression that we had back in the 80s. Thank God I lived through it. There was a time when VIA was my route to get downtown or to get anywhere I needed to go. And for what I do for a living, that was amazing, but the Lord provided it. And I want to tell you, my experience with VIA was, it was an extremely efficient and very meaningful to me at the time where I needed to have a ride, and VIA was there. So as a citizen of the community and having had that experience to live through, I'm glad we've got VIA as in the service that they provide. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Worth. Okay. Next on the list is Grace Delgado.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, all. My name is Grace Delgado. I'm at 106 South Garden View. First, I'd like to thank you for sending out the postcards about the special meeting tonight. I would like to just say that I do support VIA continuing their service here into the Castle Hills area. And I am concerned if we did allow them to leave the Castle Hills, what actually will become with the fundings that, as a city, we seem like we would be getting from not having that service. It had been brought to our attention that the reason that some of these digital signs are going up around the city was to help some of the, I guess, the streets in the city that needed funding for flooding. And I'm hoping that if you are thinking about readdressing some of the funding from VIA, you are going to be putting it in there And I was also going to ask that going forward, as a member right or resident right near the digital sign, that it would be nice if anyone near the digital area adjacent to that, within a few blocks, do get these special notices, because we never did get any notices that the sign was going up, and we would have liked to have at least been able to address it. And I understand that it wasn't a council meeting prior to that. However, I was not aware it was actually going to be a done deal, so to speak. So again, I'm hoping that if you are looking at moving those revenues from VIA, and hopefully the signs as well, to help the city with the streets. But in reality, I still believe that VIA as a service to Castle Hills should remain as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Delgado. Next on the list is Jack Joyce.
Hi, everybody. Jack Joyce, 108 Sir Arthur. We've been here before. You probably know what I'm going to say. Our family is very strongly behind VIA for a number of reasons. Personally, I think it would be penny wise and pound foolish to pull out at this time. And I think with this new $800,000 number, with the questions, the very good questions I think that council members asked, it appears to me that there is a significant risk for a serious dispute about that. And I think that's the last thing we'd want to get involved in. But in any event, we think it's a great idea. As you guys know, our son Michael makes use of the VIA Trans as well as the VIA Bus. So from a very personal standpoint, Mike is one of the 21 people there. And he depends mostly on the weekends. He lives in the northeast end of town in a group home, but travels home on the weekends, sometimes on the bus, sometimes on the VIA Trans. So we very much would like to keep it here and hope that's what will happen. And just, you guys were asking questions about the VIA Trans thing. It costs, each ride costs $2, roughly. And they buy their tickets and it's about $2 a ride. So that $1,900 in revenues that the gentleman showed, I guess, is from $2 a ride. So there is a cost to each individual rider on the VIA Trans. Anyway, thank you all for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. Javier Roman. No problem. Thanks for being here, Javier. It's good seeing you. Shirley Johnson.
My name's Shirley Johnson. I live at 209 Chaddington Court. Good evening, Mayor, City Council, and VIA. My question is this. The thousands of people that ride VIA into Castle Hills, they're coming here to Castle Hills to work, or they live here, one or the other. What is going to happen to their jobs? What's going to happen to them? What about people needing VIA to go to the doctor? A lot of people ride VIA into Castle Hills because they work in your homes. Are you going to go pick them up every day or every week and take them home afterwards? That's taking your time, where VIA would be bringing them to you. The things like this need to be brought into consideration. Also, I think you notice that everyone coming up tonight has been very positive on keeping VIA. Why waste the city's dollars and have an election? Let's just keep VIA. And my second comment is on VIA Trans. I don't look handicapped, but I am. I can't walk any long distance. VIA comes over and picks me up and takes me places. Also, a lot of the people that come into VIA, into Castle Hills, come into me for training. I don't get paid for it. This is just volunteer. I'm teaching them on self-help skills, job workman, job placement. I'll go out and watch them work and help them with jobs. These people are all intellectually disabled. They aren't in wheelchairs. They're able to work. Without VIA, your tax dollars are going to start paying for their support. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate that. Okay, it looks like we're at the end of our citizen, because there was a couple on here that didn't speak. Is there anyone out? Yes, ma'am. Robbie Casey. Yes, ma'am. State your name and address, please. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Robbie Casey, and thank you, Mayor, for calling this meeting, and thank you, Via, for being here. And obviously, you all know, as always, I have supported keeping Via in Castle Hills. We do not want to separate our city from the main city of San Antonio. And if we want to grow with our new restaurants, our new shopping centers, our new office buildings, we need to have transportation. We need to be a part of the city of San Antonio as well as city of San Antonio. I'm totally for keeping Via. Thank you.
Robbie, could you tell us your address just so we have it for the record?
Oh,
I
yes,
know.
I'm at 144 Cass Hill Drive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody? Mr. Trevino. Peter, I'll get with you in just a second, okay? State your name and address, please.
J.R. Trevino, 109 South Garden View. Mayor, Council, I want to thank you for having this forum to make it open so the citizens who are going to be affected by this can learn about it. There's been a resounding show that most people seem to be in favor of keeping Via for a variety of reasons that they've already talked about. One that I haven't heard is that the demographic in Castle Hills is changing. And the newer, younger generation is trying to be a little more economically friendly. And the people that rode Via 25 years ago, it's a little bit different on the buses now. One thing that I haven't heard and that I've seen and experienced is that the buses have Wi-Fi, is that correct? This is completely different, and the whole idea behind it is completely different, and we have to look at what's best for the city. Historically, we've been reactive, given the present state of the roads and drainage, and I urge council to help Castle Hills be proactive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trevino. Pete, do you want to bring up the end or come on up now? And okay. Oh, that's right. Okay.
My name is Peter Bella. I'm at 110 Hibiscus. Mr. Mayor, City Council, thank you for this opportunity tonight. And guests from VIA, thank you for being here. Thank you very much. I am also a supporter of VIA. And I appreciate the last comments that have to do with the changing demographics. I appreciate the earlier questions about the employees and those that are served who are perhaps not residents of the city but benefit from VIA as it is service to the city. And I also very much appreciate Mr. Gregory's and Ms. Wenger's questions. I think that those are good questions. I would also ask the panel, the chambers rather, the council, if I get the word right, if they could please to make clear to the citizens, somewhat as Bruce Smiley Califf was saying, it would be interesting for us to know how the taxes could be spent, what the conditions are under the state comptroller's requirement for local tax use were it not going to VIA. Again, I am a supporter of VIA, but I think for the goal of completeness in information, that would be of value. I would also note that one of the reasons that I am in support of VIA, among the others listed so far, is for air quality purposes. That is, knowing that the VIA buses by nature are high capacity, that is, it's not one person in a vehicle, it's not a single occupancy vehicle, it's many people in one vehicle, means that there's much better mileage in an energy sense, but because now they're becoming natural gas vehicles, which are far more environmentally friendly than our gasoline or the earlier diesel-powered vehicles, even the clean diesel vehicles. These will be cleaner on a per mile, per person, per mile carried basis. So that is another something that we should look forward to enjoying here in the city and throughout the region. Thank you all again for being here.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, ma'am.
Mayor, Council,
Fellow citizens, and for all of our guests, my name is Susan Kilgore. My address is 110 Sheffield Place. I'm standing up here to speak in support of public transportation. As a general rule, if I hear the question, public transportation, my answer is more, please. I believe that public transportation is important for the progression of our area, not just the city of Castle Hills, but our greater community, for our progression, frankly, in the 21st century. I am very pleased to hear Mr. Trevino's comment that the younger demographic is going to be interested in more public transportation. And I say that because my birth certificate would not put me in the younger demographic, but I am someone who uses public transportation. I use our current bus system approximately once a month to go places like downtown and cross town to places like Windcrest. So I'm one of the VIA riders who actually lives in our city. And I don't know that we'd heard a representative of our city who is a plain vanilla VIA rider. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Kilgore. Yes, ma'am. Can you?
Hi, I'm Laureen Juarez at 108 Cass Hills. Many of us from Cass Hills are here today. And one of the main reasons we chose our home in 1990 was because of the VIA bus stop right there on Blanco and Cass Hills. My husband worked as an attorney and law professor and has used VIA to work downtown when he was working with MALDEF, and as a professor and traveling, uses it to the airport. No one's mentioned that. It is very convenient to catch the bus to the airport. Well, we've all used it, taught my children to use VIA to go downtown, not to have to drive. And as a realtor of 25 years, I have also sold many homes in Castle Hills with the knowledge and telling them the beauty of having public transportation for ourselves. So again, I'm another vanilla user of VIA. But you know, for their friends and family or anybody working for them can use VIA to come to Castle Hills. And we have to, like the young man said, look at the future and what's going to be happening. And we want our city to develop and get more tax base and people to come in, use our facilities, come to Fiesta in April. Well, how are they going to get there, you know, if you know, from far somewhere else if we don't have VIA? So please keep VIA.
Thank you, Ms. Juarez. Okay, we'll have some final comments by council here and then wrap this up. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on the topic? Have any questions or comments for? Okay. Council, we're going to do one last run through as far as your comments are concerned. The girls, excuse me, we have recorded everything. We'll have all the questions. We'll go back, make sure that they're answered, Kim. Okay. Okay, what she said, Brother Dooling, was that we will have, excuse me, what she said, ladies and gentlemen, is the city secretary, I know, I'm the same way, I hardly heard her myself, is that if there was any question or something that you would like that wasn't covered today, or one that you did, please email it to us at the website up on the Diane file at cityofcastlehills.com, and we'll address that all as well. We will also be turning these questions, as I stated earlier, over to VIA, and they will be getting back with us, and we will publish them on our website on April 1st. So with that said, Leslie, do you have any final comments or anything to say regarding the presentation. Thank you very much. Mr. Daggett, did you have any questions or comments mainly, not questions?
I just have some thoughts about why are we having this vote in the first place? I'm a big supporter of VIA. I campaigned in support of VIA, and there was an overwhelming people wanted to have a choice on VIA. It was a vote, with a vote. So I'm going to read something I wrote here. Why is there a vote on VIA coming up? Our city has great drainage and street needs. How do we pay for them? Unlike VIA, we cannot issue bonds because we want new streets. We have tried to pass bonds in the past to pay for our streets and drainage needs, and they have failed. Our citizens have said no to bonds. Our city has limited business district for tax revenue. We are landlocked and cannot expand for more tax revenue. We have started to get streets and drainage projects going with the money we have, and we're stretching our dollar, but we have barely scratched the surface of the overall needs. So this leads to the question. If we can't borrow the money in a bond, then using approximately $500,000 of this sales tax dollar going to VIA will help make a dent in that long-term goal. If we stay in VIA, then raising taxes is the only other option, and that is also not very popular. So this is a tough decision. We have to run this city like a business and make wise choices with our dollar in order to be sustainable long-term. We can't have it all. This election is not about whether someone likes VIA or not. VIA provides a great service for our city, for people that come here to work and shop. VIA is a very nice social service benefit for our citizens to have, but can we afford it and still provide for our own needs? Even if we could, this is too big a decision for council to decide. It is for you, our citizens, to decide what is important to you, knowing the consequences of your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daggett. Mr. Squire, did you like to follow that, please?
Ditto. No. Very good, thank you. Now, I guess I can take a little bit of liberty here, if I may, but you know, I appreciate VIA showing up, and more importantly, I appreciate everybody else that showed up and for their insightful comments and questions. I think everybody, I took notes here as we were going through, so, but I really appreciate that. You know, and Matt is right. If we didn't have this issue of really a budget shortfall to cover our known and immediate needs for infrastructure work that needs to be done in the city, and it's quite a bit of work, and I do my best to help in that process in my area. This would never, I don't think this ever would have come up. I think public transportation is a needed thing. I think it's I personally do believe in it also, and I hope VIA takes note of that as far as you know, when cities are crying out there. If there's a way to better serve the city, I hope VIA can put that thinking cap on and help our city, as I speak from a very selfish point of view, to help provide public transportation, but what are the resources that may be brought to bear to help the city of Castle Hills? On drainage in particular, you know, I know we are now in the process of reaching out, and this is my liberty. I think Bexar County, and maybe VIA could help in that regard, don't know. I think Bexar County should start to step up to the plate and utilize some of those drainage funds to help the influx of stormwater runoff that we get into our city from the city of San Antonio. And I hope Bexar County starts to listen and start to help us in that regard. We've been a good citizen all these years, and I hope we get some reciprocating going forward on that, because we have a huge need. We have 2 people here have their houses flooded many times, and many citizens in this city are getting flooded. Fortunately, we don't live in a floodplain, but we continue to get flooded over and over again. Many residences severely get flooded. So we're obviously looking for help. That's what started all this. I think that's what's pushing this thing forward. But if there are creative solutions to help us, that's what we're out there trying to do right now too. So again, I believe in public transportation. I think it's necessary. I think it's necessary for the growth of the city going forward. And I hope that you know, well, to step aside on that one more thing, I also believe in the right of the citizens to vote. I hope everybody does vote with their conscience and make an appropriate decision, and then we can go ahead and get this behind us and move forward as a city. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Squire. Mr. Paul, did you have any comments, final comments before we?
Just a couple of things I'd like to ditto along with Matt. Matt and I kind of campaigned last year together, and we ran into this constantly with people. They would say, well, we're for VIA, but we want the right to vote on it. That's the only reason we're here, is because many of our citizens wanted the right to vote on it. And that doesn't mean they're going to vote against VIA. So again, I need to reiterate, it's not our decision up here. There are 6 people sitting up here, and we each have a vote, one vote, just like everybody else out there. And that's the way it should be. I know what people want. Let me give you a number as an example. And by the way, telling us is good, but more importantly, tell your neighbor, discuss it with them, pros and cons. That's the important thing. Get out and talk to your neighbors about it. Look, we have a handful of people here tonight, which is great. Maybe some of them, I don't know how many are watching online, but we need to let them know and discuss it. If VIA goes away, what's going to happen? If VIA stays, we have an approximation, and it's just an approximation, of an $8 million item on north of Northwest Military in Garden View and over in that area, Carrollwood, streets like that, Banyan, that we need to fix drainage. I mean, you know, these signs out here, the 2 signs only bring so much money a year. So we're looking to do everything we can with what we have. We have problems, I call them problems that have been inherited and pushed down the line for the last 50 years. They have not been addressed. And now we're doing the best we can, and we're just looking everywhere we can. But again, it's not our decision to remove VIA or to keep VIA. It's your decision and your neighbor's decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Mr. Gregory, did you have any last comments before we adjourn?
I hope everybody does understand that the council has given grave thought into this. I came on the council originally in 2003. There was a city manager then there called Mike Shands. And Mike Shands taught me a lot of how the city should work and how you should manage monies. One thing he did tell me was, there's something you've got to keep in your back pocket when things get very, very tough. I said, well, what the heck is that? He said, VIA. I had no idea VIA was part of the half-point sales tax then. He said, don't ever mention it until the city's back is against the wall. I've been the city treasurer off and on for a lot of years. This has been predicated by 2 bond issues that we had. We had one in 2009 in which all the streets were listed exactly what was going to be done, and it was turned down about 53 to 47%. The last bond issue, the one when Mayor Smiley was here, was so infantilely stupid that it lost by 81.5% of the vote. Now, that was bad enough, but it poisoned the well for how people saw bonds. That if the council can't even get their act together to put a bond that my dead dog Cleopatra could have understood, then why should we give them any money for anything? As chairman of the Drainage Committee, we are now finishing up and finding we're going to have a complete master plan, and it will probably cost $20 million in that neighborhood to address the drainage problems in the city, which are severe. I wanted people to vote on this. I've been trying to get a vote on this for quite a few years because it's your future as well as mine. It's just not few people here on the council. Where do you think we want to be in 5 years, in 10 years? That's important. If we keep VIA, we will live with it and we will do as well as we can, and I think that is it's a very sound decision to do that. If we decide to leave VIA, it's not a permanent thing because you can always get back in. But let's say you decide to leave VIA, then we get about $500,000 a year. That's not enough to complete everything, but it's enough to at least start addressing some things and maybe leveraging them in a bond issue. But let's say we keep VIA, and I have never publicly stated how I'm going to vote. I haven't campaigned one way or another because I don't want people to vote for one thing because I'm for it or against one thing because I'm for it. But if we decide to keep VIA, the next logical step is to raise your property tax rate equal to or greater than at least what we would have gotten if we had stayed with VIA. Now, a $300,000 house, that would be about, I think about $200 or $250 every year for the next 20 years, and that would be between $4,500 and $6,000. It would vary. That's what you would pay if you decided you want to get that money. I'm not sure that would pass. And we'd be up a creek with absolutely no paddle. No one wants bonds. No one wants property tax increase. Everybody wants VIA. Then what do we do? I don't know. I think, though, and this is why I've been pushing this for so strongly, I think the people of Castle Hills are a very pragmatic bunch of people. I think they recognize no matter how the vote goes, we're going to somehow find a way out. It's how much, it's how you want to get out of this problem. Because the problem isn't going to go away. It's still going to be there 5 years from now. We're going to have another big rain at some time, and everybody's going to complain how bad the flooding is. That's not going to change. If we're going to raise property taxes, or if we're going to have a bond issue, we have to have a change of the mind of the people of the city. I don't know whether you all have changed your mind. For the last 2 years, this council, I think, has done a marvelous job at ferreting out money and of spending it, generally speaking, on very sound projects. I think we have very sound projects coming up, but it's limited for what we have to do. The billboards are bringing in over $200,000 a year and will increase every year for the next 25 years. I and Frank Paul, we were the committee, along with the city manager and the mayor. That is a big plus to the city. But there's only so many new places you can look for money now. Every little hamlet of over 1,000 people is looking for a grant. So don't think the solution lies in grants, because there are 10,000 cities in the state that are looking for grants. So absolutely think about this issue and vote on it. And however you vote, I'm happy with no matter what you do. I just want you to vote. I want you to think on it, because I don't want people a few years down the road to say, I didn't know, I didn't understand, I didn't think of this, I didn't think of that. Here's your opportunity. Here's your opportunity, not this council's. This is one thing I really objected to, the council arbitrarily deciding, never, ever, ever bringing this for you all to think about. I'm glad you're thinking about it. And however the vote goes, I'm happy because I got a vote. And I want you all to have the same thing that I had as a council member. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. I'll make the final comment. You know, we've talked about a lot of things this evening. By the way, thank you, Jeff, for coming forward, Leroy, Shauna, who lives right here in our city, Dwayne, for being here tonight representing Bexar County. You know, to me, VIA is more than just a transportation service. It's a lifeline. Folks, we live within the seventh largest city of the United States. It is a lifeline that helps us economically. It's a lifeline that helps us in every way. Diane, who did you call when we had a tragedy at the Wedgwood here about a year ago? And who had a number of buses out here to transport people over to Churchill without questioning who was going to pay for it, how was it going to work, how are we going to move forward? Are we even allowed to do that by law? I don't know. But you know what? We transferred however many people it was. I might be overstating it by 200 and some odd. Maybe I am overstating it. But we transferred those people to Churchill into a situation where we could process them out. Okay? This is what VIA is to me. It's more than a transportation service. We've talked about infrastructure tonight. We've talked about drainage. We've talked about streets. I'm not going to get into a political of what we campaigned for and what we didn't campaign for. But what we did do is say that we would bring a plan, and we would bring a plan to this city, and we would do it, and we would pay for it. So with that, we went out, we basically took the black hole of 410, which was the only space within the 410 system that didn't have digital billboards, and what did we do? We went and we went through the process. Douglas was the chairman of that committee. Frank Paul was on that committee, the city manager, and we went over it for however long it took, and we got it. We went to the plate and got it, okay? And that is real money that supports infrastructure. I'm getting to a point here. We have another black hole, Military Highway. Are we going to put an 80-foot billboard on Military Highway? I don't think so. But I think what we will do is we'll put smaller ones that will bring revenue into this city, and that will be what supports our drainage, our streets, our infrastructure, so to say. For the first time ever in the history of this city, thanks to this council, every single one up here, not me, but every single one of these people up here, we have a street program. We're in phase 2 now. This thing's going to go to phase 3, phase 4. If you look around, we are making progress. We are doing new ideas. We have a service coming out next week to place some new type of thing on streets that Chavano Park is using. Dave, you're familiar with that when you were out there? We're moving forward. We're paying for things. Are we going to fix our $30-40 million street situation overnight? Of course not. Anybody who says that, I don't know, maybe we'll win the lottery. I'm not sure. But what I am saying is we're inching forward. We have a plan. We don't have the worst streets in the city of Castle Hills. There are streets that are very bad, but we're moving along. We partnered with SAWS. We partnered with the utilities. We went out, we went down and worked with Bear County. We're going to get together even further with Bear County. And what we're going to do is partner with other cities to get the best deal possible. So we are moving forward as a city. We are moving forward economically. We are letting our transportation service come right up the middle of our economic development street, Military Highway. For those of you who don't know, the Castle Hills Baptist Church is for sale. Wedgwood is getting ready to do whatever they're going to do over there. They're not walking away. These are going to be economic centers for this city. I've talked to, and they gave me the permission to say their names, but I'm not going to do it. I've talked to our 4 major businesses, and this is not Pate Dawson, our 4 major businesses in the city of Castle Hills this past week who said they would be devastated if we lost VIA. Their employees use VIA to get to work. They are thriving businesses in the city. We have more coming. So I can't imagine a city that doesn't have an economic tie to the 7th largest city in the United States. The overwhelming newest businesses coming to town, down on 410 and West Avenue. Burger King, he told me to state that name tonight. Most of his employees work there. HEB. Stop in there and ask the manager how many of his customers ride VIA to the store. All I wanted to get across tonight is we have a plan. We have a good council. We are focused. We have direction. And we will move forward. And every single person up here to this point, and I would hope in the future, is dedicated to do that. So in case anybody wasn't clear where I stand on VIA, I wanted to make sure that they knew that without a shadow of a doubt, that the mayor of Castle Hills is in favor of VIA and giving the people the right to vote. I spoke to the reporter from the Express News sitting in the second row there, And she said to me in one of our conversations, what do you think about the vote? And this is what I said, bring it on. Because I'll tell you, at the end of the day, when the dust settles, I think there will be no surprise. So, ladies and gentlemen, all I have to say is thank you for coming tonight. Jeff, gentleman from Via Leroy, every one of the citizens that came tonight and spoke, whether you're for Via or you're against Via, at the end of the day, I think Councilman Gregory said it the best. Express your views. Vote. Get out there. Tell us what you want. Think about what Via said. Send in some questions that you're not sure about. Thank you very much for being here. With that said, do we have a motion for adjournment? Second? Thank you. Thanks again for being here, folks.